Have you ever considered the impact of low food prices on the individuals who grow our food? The lifeblood of our sustenance, farmers, often bear the brunt of economic policies and market pressures. One such instance is the 2024 French farmer protest, a movement that began in the heart of Occitania and spread like wildfire across the nation. Let's dive into the story of the 2024 French farmer protest to understand more. The protest started on January 18, 2024, initiated by agricultural unions. As the backbone of France's food supply, farmers felt the weight of the world on their shoulders. Yet they found themselves battling against an undercurrent of challenges that threatened their livelihood and, by extension, the nation's food security. The farmers' resentment stemmed from several factors. First, low food prices, a double-edged sword that, while benefiting consumers, left the farmers struggling to cover their costs. Imagine working tirelessly, day in and day out, only to find that the fruits of your labor were being undervalued. Next came the proposed reductions in state subsidies for farmers' diesel fuel. These subsidies served as a lifeline for many farmers, helping them maintain their machinery and keep their operations afloat. The prospect of losing this vital support was akin to pulling the rug from under their feet. The final straw was the EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement. This agreement, while potentially beneficial for the broader economy, posed a significant threat to the farmers. They feared being undercut by cheaper imports, further driving down the prices of their produce and threatening their already fragile existence. A spark was ignited, and the farmers decided to stand against these perceived injustices. They banded together, united by their shared struggles and a determination to make their voices heard. And so, the protest began, starting in Occitania and swiftly spreading to block major roads, including the A64 motorway. The government, in an attempt to quell the growing unrest, decided to scrap the proposed subsidy reductions. However, this move proved to be too little, too late. The farmers, unsatisfied with this partial resolution, continued their protests. They were not just fighting for subsidies or against a trade agreement. They were fighting for their survival, for their right to a fair and sustainable livelihood. Despite the government's initial action of scrapping proposed subsidy reductions, the protests persisted. The spark of protest had been lit, and it was rapidly growing into a blazing fire, one that threatened to engulf the entire nation in its wake. From a regional movement in Occitania, the protest quickly spread across the country. Farmers, united by their frustrations and fears, began to take drastic measures. Major roads became the battlefields of their discontent, blockades sprouting up like angry welts across the nation's arteries of commerce and travel. The A64 motorway, once a bustling thoroughfare, was choked off by tractors and hay bales. An imposing barricade against the steady tide of indifference they felt was washing over them. But it wasn't just the roads that bore the brunt of the farmers' anger. Property damage became a common sight as the farmers' ire found expression in the physical world. Yet it was the capital, Paris, that became the stage for the protest's most audacious act. Dubbed Operation Paris Siege, the farmers descended on the city with a relentless determination. Paris, the heart of France, was effectively under siege by those who felt their pleas for justice and understanding had been ignored for too long. Tractors, the farmers' trusted companions in the fields, became their weapons of choice in the city, encircling Paris in a formidable ring of steel and determination. The disruption to traffic, trade, and politics was significant, a stark reminder of the farmers' plight and their willingness to go to great lengths to be heard. As the farmers held their ground, the nation held its breath. The protests were not just causing physical disruptions, but also challenging the very fabric of society. The farmers' struggle was shining a harsh light on the realities of their profession and the unsustainable pressures they were under. Yet amidst the turmoil, a sense of unity was emerging. The farmers' cause was resonating beyond France's borders. In neighboring Belgium, farmers were setting up their own barricades, a tangible sign of solidarity with their French counterparts. The situation escalated as farmers from neighboring Belgium set up their own barricades in solidarity. Their actions were a stark reminder that this was not just a French issue, but a struggle shared by farmers across Europe. It was a spreading discontent, a growing demand for change, and a stark warning of the consequences if such change was not forthcoming. Farmers launched Operation Paris Siege, deploying tractors to surround Paris. This was not a spontaneous act of rebellion, but a calculated move, part of a larger movement sweeping across Europe. Farmers from various corners of the continent were pushing back against cuts to subsidies and new regulations, a wave of discontent that had now reached the heart of France. Paris, the city of love, was now under siege, not by an enemy army, but by its own people, the farmers. These hardworking individuals, the backbone of the country's food supply, had decided enough was enough. They were tired of struggling against regulations that seemed to squeeze their livelihoods from all sides, tired of competing with imported foods that were sold at prices they couldn't match, and tired of seeing their traditional subsidies, their lifeline, being cut off. But the government was not idle. They mobilized a staggering 15,000 police officers to keep the capital's airports and major food sellers open. It was a delicate balancing act, maintaining order while avoiding outright confrontation with the protesting farmers who were, after all, just voicing their concerns, their fears. The farmers expressed concerns about the decline in biodiversity and the threat to their way of life. They were not just fighting for their survival, but for the preservation of a centuries-old tradition, a way of life that was slowly being eroded by the relentless tide of modernization and globalization. Their plight resonated with many. Their cause was taken up by populist politicians, and their protest, Operation Paris Siege, became a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for those who felt marginalized and overlooked by the powers that be. And thus, the protests became a hot political topic in European capitals. The farmers had made their stand, had made their voices heard, and the world was watching. The question now was, how would the powers that be respond? Would they heed the call of their people, or would they choose to ignore the cries of the very people who fed them? French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal attempted to ease tensions by offering new concessions. As the protests continued to escalate, the government made several attempts to address the farmers' grievances. One of the key steps taken was the introduction of controls on foreign food products to ensure fair competition. This move was aimed at protecting French farmers from the influx of cheap imports that were driving down prices and making it difficult for local farmers to survive. Furthermore, Prime Minister Attal took a firm stand against food retailers who were not complying with a law designed to ensure fair revenues for farmers. In a bid to enforce this law, the government introduced hefty fines for those found to be in breach of it. This measure was seen as a direct response to the farmers' calls for better remuneration and a more level playing field. In addition to these domestic measures, the French government also sought to rally international support. Attal managed to gather a coalition of 22 European Union countries to agree on an EU waiver on fallow land. This was a significant move as farmers were required to leave 4% of their farmland non-productive in order to receive EU subsidies. The waiver aimed to alleviate some of the financial strain on farmers and provide them with more flexibility. The government also promised to simplify technical procedures and put an end to diesel fuel taxes for farm vehicles. These measures were part of a broader plan to reduce the red tape that farmers often complained about and to ease some of the financial burdens associated with farming. Despite these efforts, the government's response was met with mixed reactions. While some welcomed the measures, many farmers felt that they did not fully address their concerns. The major farmers' unions deemed the government's plan insufficient, arguing that it did not go far enough in tackling the issues they faced. This dissatisfaction led to the continuation of the protests, with farmers maintaining their blockades and intensifying their demonstrations. However, the farmers deemed these measures insufficient, leading to the continuation of the protests. The impact of these protests is felt far and wide. The ripple effects of the farmers' barricades have disrupted the rhythm of daily life, from the bustling city of Paris to the quietest corners of the countryside. Major highways are blocked, with the A7 and other roads in southern France being particularly affected. This has caused significant delays and disruptions to traffic, affecting commuters and businesses alike. But the impact goes beyond mere inconvenience. The protests have also led to disruptions in food deliveries and the wider food supply chain. This is a serious concern. as it could potentially lead to shortages in grocery stores and markets. And these are not the only businesses feeling the pinch. The road blockages have also disrupted the delivery of key ingredients to bakeries, which are a staple of French life and culture. And yet, despite these challenges, public support for the farmers remains strong. This is evident from the free croissants and baguettes that bakeries have been sending to the barricades. This act of solidarity reflects a deep understanding of the farmers' plight among the general public. After all, the farmers are not just protesting for their own benefit. They are also raising awareness about the decline in biodiversity and the threat to their way of life, issues that affect us all. So as the farmers continue their protest, they are not alone. They have the support of their fellow citizens, and their struggle has resonated with people across Europe and around the world. But the question remains, how will this situation be resolved? Will the government's measures be enough to meet the farmers' demands, or will the protests escalate, leading to even greater disruption and potential conflict? As the protests continue, the world watches and waits for a resolution. This is not just a French issue, it is a global one, highlighting the pressing need for fair trade practices, sustainable agriculture, and a more equitable distribution of resources. It is a reminder that those who grow our food are not just workers, but stewards of the land and guardians of our future.